Maybe you clicked just out of curiosity. Or maybe, without even knowing, you were looking for a quiet corner, a space where words take their time, and silence is part of the story. I wrote this with care, like stitching together memories, small aches, and quiet truths, hoping that somewhere in it you'll see a reflection of your own. If that happens, even for a moment, stay. Listen as far as you need, and if something speaks to you, leave a little trace. It doesn't have to be big. Sometimes a simple, "I'm here" in the comments says more than you think. A like, a share, a quiet subscription. They're small gestures, but around here, they mean a lot. I was 29, living in a crumbling studio in Boston, working 2 jobs, and eating frozen lasagna every other night, but somehow still clinging to the idea of homeownership. My name's Claire, and for most of my adult life, I've been the kind of person who keeps her head down and handles her own shit. I moved out at 18 with nothing but a few trash bags and a laptop that overheated if I used Chrome and Spotify at the same time. Since then, no financial help, no safety net, just me, some hustle, and a spreadsheet that's been color-coded since 2014. By day, I'm a digital project manager for a mid-sized agency. It's not glamorous, but I'm good at it. At night, I tutor high school students in algebra and AP calculus, not because I love math, I don't, but because private school parents pay ridiculous rates when college applications are involved. For nearly a decade, I'd been grinding with one goal in mind: a house. Not a mansion. Not a fixer-upper with charm that's code for asbestos. Just something stable. Something mine. A 1-story starter home in the suburbs, maybe. A driveway, a patch of grass. A kitchen that wasn't the same size as a coat closet. But Boston's housing market doesn't care how many spreadsheets you've built or how many Friday nights you spent skipping dinner out with friends. Even after saving every bonus check, tax refund, tutoring gig, and skipped vacation, I was still about $12,000 short of what I needed for a competitive down payment. That number sat on the corner of my whiteboard, underlined in red. $12,000 between me and a mortgage. Between me and a quiet morning where I didn't have to hear my upstairs neighbor's new boyfriend learning the drums at 6 a.m. Between me and finally not having to wrap my space heater in duct tape because the radiator made a sound like it was choking on a fork. I wasn't dreaming of owning property to brag about it on LinkedIn. I was dreaming of peace. A space where no one could raise the rent, where I didn't need to check the ceiling for mold every rainy week, where I could breathe and say, "This is mine." And for the first time since I was 18, I thought maybe I could ask for help. Just a little, not the whole $12,000, not a blank check, just a small boost. A family nudge to push me across the finish line. It would be the first time I asked my parents for anything since I moved out. And if I'm honest, it took me weeks to build up the nerve. But when I finally did, well, that's where this story really begins. I wasn't asking for a house, I was asking for a chance. They laughed like I'd asked to borrow a yacht. It took me 3 weeks to even bring it up. Every drafted text felt wrong. Every phone call ended with, "Maybe next time." Asking for help, especially from my parents, wasn't something that came naturally. I'd spent my whole adult life making damn sure I wouldn't need to. But that red number on the whiteboard, $12,000, it stared back at me like a countdown. And the market wasn't slowing down. One more bidding war lost, and I knew I'd be stuck paying rent for another year, maybe more. So one Sunday afternoon, after meal prepping my sad little containers of chicken and rice, I drove out to my parents' place in Westwood. Suburban comfort. The same place they'd lived in for 22 years. White siding, front porch swing, and a live laugh love sign that hadn't aged well. I told myself to be calm, clear, professional even. I rehearsed it in my head like a job interview. Not a gift, a loan, interest if they want, payback schedule, documentation. They were in the kitchen, Dad nursing his third cup of black coffee, Mom scrolling on her phone like it was oxygen. I waited for a pause. There wasn't one, so I just dove in. Hey, I've been working on buying a place. I'm really close, just short about $12,000. I wouldn't be asking if it weren't important, but would you be open to helping me? Just a loan. I'll pay it back. Silence. Then, my dad laughed, like actual out-loud chuckling. The kind you reserve for stand-up comedy, not your daughter reaching out after a decade of self-reliance. 12,000? He said, wiping his eye. Claire, you're nearly 30. Time to stop playing victim. That sentence hung in the air like the smell of burnt toast. I turned to my mom. She didn't even look up. You're the responsible one, she murmured, thumb still scrolling. You'll figure it out. You always do. And just like that, I wasn't in a kitchen. I was in a courtroom, on trial for having the audacity to ask for support after a decade of handling everything myself. I tried to keep my voice steady. It's not about the money. It's just a little help to beat out a cash offer. I can show you my savings, the listings, even the loan pre-approval. Claire, my dad cut in, we helped with your college. That was enough. We're not made of money. I could have reminded him that I paid off those student loans myself, that their help was a few $1,000s freshman year and a used couch. But what would be the point? They had decided. Their version of reality was sealed, and in it, I was too old to ask. So I nodded. Once. Slowly, like I understood. Then I picked up my keys and left. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't try to change their minds. But something in me cracked on the way back to my apartment. Not loudly, not visibly, just enough for the cold air to get in. By the time I was back inside, back to the smell of stale radiator heat and the upstairs neighbors shouting over whose turn it was to do laundry, I sat on the edge of my futon and stared at that red number again. $12,000. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't hurt. Not really. But I was done asking. And that, I think, was the beginning of the end. She posted the marble bathtub. I looked at the cracked tiles in my rental. We were born of the same parents, but raised in different economies. My sister Madison was the kind of person who could fall face first into a pile of glitter and somehow walk out with a brand deal. She was 2 years younger than me, but you'd think we came from separate planets, not just opposite ends of the same hallway growing up. While I was getting my FAFSA forms rejected for missing a signature, Madison was taking gap years to find herself in Bali, funded by Mom and Dad, of course. When I bought my first used car with cash from tutoring, she totaled hers and got a newer model as a learning experience. Same parents, same last name, completely different worldviews. She calls herself a life alignment coach, which, from what I gather, means she wears pastel athleisure, hosts vision board retreats, and posts motivational quotes she didn't write over stock photos of sunsets. Her fiancé, now husband, is a wellness content creator, which I think loosely translates to vibes consultant with an Instagram filter package. They live in LA, where reality has a subscription model. I hadn't heard from Madison in weeks when the post showed up. It was the middle of January. Boston was blanketed in slush. I had just spent 40 minutes shoveling the walkway outside my building because the landlord forgot again. My gloves were wet, my back ached, and my reward was coming inside to the sound of my upstairs neighbor fighting with someone on FaceTime about lemon hummus. That's when I opened Instagram. Madison was smiling on a balcony somewhere tropical, holding a glass of something pink and sparkly. Behind her, a sweeping view of ocean, a private pool, infinity edge, white marble floors. I thought it was a hotel ad until I read the caption. Still can't believe this is real. Huge thanks to Mom and Dad for this surprise honeymoon getaway, 3 months of heaven in the Florida Keys. Blessed, grateful, manifested it. I didn't blink, didn't even scroll, just stared. The post had 78,000 likes. I had 78 unread emails in my work inbox and a toilet that wouldn't flush unless I jiggled the handle just right. And suddenly, everything made sense. The way Mom had smiled extra wide in the holiday card photos next to Madison and her fiancé. The way Dad said, "It's a different time now," when I asked about financial help. The way I was told, "We're not made of money," 2 weeks ago. But they apparently were made of enough money to fund a 3-month beachfront mansion. It wasn't just the money. It was that no one told me. It was that they could drop 6 figures on a luxury fantasy getaway and not even think to mention it. That they were willing to let me freeze my fingers off trying to scrape together a down payment while treating her honeymoon like a sponsored Netflix series. I didn't text her, didn't call, didn't forward the post to anyone or write a bitter sub-post. But something turned over in me that night. Not rage, not even sadness. Just a kind of quiet, sharpened resolve. You know that moment in a movie where the music drops out and the character just stares out the window as the light shifts? That was me. Sitting in my cracked leather desk chair, still in my snow boots, staring at her post like it was a roadmap to everything I'd never been given. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, and I started building a different kind of spreadsheet. Grandma used to say, "They see her sparkle, but you're the steady flame." I thought it was a compliment. Turns out, it was a warning. I didn't grow up in some tragic household. There was no yelling, no slammed doors, no CPS visits. But if you've ever lived in a family that prefers the louder sibling, then you know exactly how painful quiet neglect can be. When I was 10, my parents sent me to live with Grandma Margaret for a summer while they sorted things out with Madison's dance schedule and Dad's consulting gig in Denver. I was told it would be fun and like a vacation. It wasn't. It was exile. But Margaret? She made it feel like I belonged. Her house smelled like cinnamon, lemon oil, and that old book warmth you can't bottle. She made pancakes shaped like animals. Let me help with the Sunday crossword even when I guessed wrong. And every evening, we'd sit by the window and drink tea like we were 2 old souls just killing time. She never said much about my parents, and I never asked. But one afternoon, while we baked apple pie for no reason at all, she looked at me, flour on her hands, and said, "They see her sparkle, you know, but you're the steady flame, the kind that keeps people warm when the lights go out." I smiled then, thinking she meant I was strong. Now I realize she meant they'd never notice me until everything else failed. Margaret was the first person who ever saw me as more than the other daughter. She saw my patterns, how I always tried to earn praise instead of expecting it. She saw how I clung to being useful, because no one ever treated me like I was inherently worthy. And she never pitied me. She just noticed, quietly, deeply, like she was cataloging something no one else bothered to look at. When she passed, 3 years ago, I didn't cry at the funeral. I was too busy making coffee for guests and cleaning up after the reception. My name wasn't mentioned in the eulogy. Madison read a poem. Mom wept into the same handkerchief she used at Madison's graduation. And I thought, that's it. She's gone. I don't even get to miss her out loud until last week. A white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just my full name. Handwritten. Sharp, elegant penmanship. I'd know it anywhere. Inside was a single-page letter and a contact card for a law firm in Providence. The letter was dated 2 years prior. just 3 months before she passed. Claire, if you're reading this, it means your parents haven't told you the truth. I never stopped watching out for you. I just had to find a way to do it from beyond the noise. I set something aside. Quietly, carefully, for you. Because I knew one day they'd try to convince you that you're alone. And I want you to remember. The flame outlasts the sparkle. Always. Love, Grandma. I stood in my kitchen for almost an hour, just staring at the note. The same kitchen where the ceiling leaked every time it rained, where I boiled pasta on one functioning burner, where the tiles were so chipped I had to tape down the corners of the mat to keep from tripping. And I realized she never stopped noticing, not even when she was gone. And if she had left me something, anything, then maybe I wasn't chasing a dream after all. Maybe I'd just been waiting for a signal that someone believed in me too. I picked up the phone and called the law firm. Grandma didn't leave me riches. She left me power. The law office was in an old building in downtown Providence, exposed brick, weird elevator, free parking out back if you got lucky. The kind of place where everything smelled faintly like lemon pledge and old court files. I half expected this to be a mistake, a mix-up, or worse, a symbolic gesture, like a $100 savings bond and a note about staying strong. But Margaret never did things halfway. The lawyer, Ms. Elaine Porter, was in her 60s, sharp as glass, and wore a brooch shaped like a typewriter. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "You were the only beneficiary. The trust was structured to activate on your 30th birthday, or earlier, if certain conditions were met. Your parents were not notified." I blinked. "She never mentioned anything about this to me," I said quietly. "She didn't tell anyone," Elaine replied. "That was the point. What she handed me next didn't feel real. Account summaries, transfer documents, a letter from Margaret notarized and dated. The total? More than I dared to hope for. Not lottery money, not millionaire money, but enough. Enough for a down payment. Enough to close. Enough to stop scraping by and start standing still. It had been invested over years, diversified, tax-optimized. Quiet, smart, like her. She wanted to protect it from interference, Elaine added. Said you'd know when the time was right. I sat there in a chair that squeaked every time I breathed, gripping paperwork that felt like oxygen. No one had ever planned for me. Not like this. My parents planned parties. They planned gifts for Madison's birthdays, loans for her car, checks for her branding retreats. But no one had quietly, privately, deliberately carved out a future for me. Until now. 2 weeks later, I closed on a home in a quiet suburb outside Providence. 3 bedrooms, white trim, tiny backyard, kitchen island, fireplace that actually worked. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't trendy. But it was mine. I didn't post a single picture, didn't tell my coworkers, didn't group text my college friends, and definitely didn't tell my family. I moved in on a Friday, alone, with 2 suitcases, a mattress, and a box of books. The walls were empty, the floors creaked, the fridge was loud. It was perfect. I slept that night with the windows open, wrapped in a blanket, listening to silence. For the first time in my adult life, no upstairs neighbors, no rent increases, no one else's name on the lease, no need to ask for anything ever again. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling fans spinning slowly above me, I whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." She didn't leave me wealth. She left me a way out, and with it, the fire they thought they had already put out. I sent them an address and said, "Just drop by. No occasion." It was a Tuesday morning when I sent the message. Just a simple text in the group chat labeled, "Family, just us 3. A relic from years ago that rarely lit up unless Madison was tagged in a magazine. Hey, if you're free this weekend, I'd love to catch up. Come by for tea. No occasion, just an address. Let me know. I didn't expect them to respond quickly. But 20 minutes later, Dad gave it a thumbs up. Then Mom replied, looking forward to it, like we'd always done this kind of thing. They didn't ask where the address was. Didn't ask whose house it was. I guess they assumed it was a friend's place. Or maybe an Airbnb? Because in their minds, I didn't live like that. The house was already furnished. Soft light blues, plants by the windows, books stacked in corners. I baked scones that morning, not because I wanted to impress them, but because I wanted the house to smell like safety. Cinnamon. Vanilla. A hint of lemon from the mop I'd used that morning. The kind of scent that says, someone lives here. Someone built this. They arrived 5 minutes early. Dad pulled up in his usual charcoal Lexus, sunglasses on, looking smug in that I always drive with one hand kind of way. Mom stepped out in a long beige trench, designer heels clicking against the brick path. They both hesitated in front of the door. I watched from the hallway, calm as ever. No butterflies, no tremors. Just grounded. I opened the door with a smile. Come on in, I said casually. They stepped inside like they were walking onto a movie set. The living room was clean but lived in. Art on the walls, a stack of cookbooks next to the fireplace, a woven throw across the couch. Dad took a slow look around. Mom's eyes flicked from the hardwood floors to the dining nook, to the vintage record player in the corner. Wait, she said, almost whispering. Claire, you live here? I nodded, heading toward the kitchen. You bought this? She asked again, her voice wobbling, hands still clutching her purse like it might give her balance. I pulled the scones out of the oven, plated them neatly, poured tea into ceramic mugs. With what Grandma left me, I said, turning back to face them steady. She'd been planning it for a while. They didn't sit. They stood in the living room like guests at the wrong party. Everything about their body language said, we don't belong here. We didn't expect this. You didn't tell us, Dad finally said. No, I replied, handing him a cup of Earl Grey. Didn't seem like you'd be interested. Mom was still frozen in place, blinking. You furnished it so beautifully, she murmured. This doesn't feel like you. I smiled. That's because you've never really taken time to see me. They sat down after that, awkwardly, like strangers at a first date. We sipped tea, talked weather. I asked about their dog. They asked nothing about the house, but their eyes never stopped scanning the walls. Taking it all in, the subtle flex wasn't in the square footage. It was in the calm, in the quiet confidence of a space that required no permission to exist. And they knew it. They felt it. They just didn't know yet that this wasn't the main course. This was the appetizer. Inside was a spreadsheet, not vengeance, just facts. We made it through 2 scones, a full cup of tea, and 10 minutes of small talk about Rhode Island weather before I stood up and walked to the sideboard. I didn't rush. Didn't dramatize the moment. I picked up the cream-colored envelope I had placed there earlier, sealed, labeled in my neatest handwriting. For David and Linda. From Claire, I turned back toward them and gently laid it on the coffee table between our mugs. This is for you, I said simply. They looked at it like it might explode. What is it? Dad asked, already stiffening. Documentation, I said. Just context. No one moved for a moment. Then Mom reached forward, slid her manicured nail under the flap, and pulled out the papers. 3 pages, stapled, clean, titled in bold, Requested Support versus Provided Support, Claire versus Madison, 2014 to 2024. The first page listed everything I had ever asked them for, itemized. Fall semester textbooks, $580. Therapist co-pays during post-grad burnout, $960. Partial help for first car, denied, $0. Down payment assistance, 2023, $12,000, denied. Below that, a sum total of $15,340 requested across 10 years, of which they had contributed $600. The second page was Madison's column. Gap year in Southeast Asia, $8,700. Lease on Jeep Grand Cherokee, $11,400. Branding retreat in Sedona, $3,200 Malibu wedding venue deposit, $42,000 honeymoon villa. Florida Keys, $76,000 miscellaneous transfers, $113,000 plus estimated total, $254,300. No commentary, no color coding, no angry footnotes. Just numbers, facts. Mom's lips parted, but no words came out. Dad's fingers flexed on the edge of the paper like he didn't know whether to tear it or fold it. "This isn't an attack," I said gently. "It's clarity." I sat back down. "I'm not asking for an explanation. I already got one, remember? The day you laughed when I asked for help? This isn't to guilt you. I don't even need it anymore." They were silent, and for the first time in my life, that silence didn't scare me. It empowered me, because now they weren't in control of the narrative. There were no dismissive chuckles, no passive-aggressive deflections, just two parents being forced to look at their own math. No emotion to hide behind, just equity and balance in cold font. Mom tried to speak again, but her voice caught. "Claire, we didn't realize—" "I know," I said. "That's the point." She closed the folder slowly. "And what do you want us to do with this?" "Nothing," I answered. "It's not a bill. I'm not looking for repayment. I'm just done pretending the scales were ever balanced." I stood and walked to the door. Not to rush them out, but to draw a boundary they'd never seen coming. "Thanks for coming, and for the tea." They stood too, slowly, stiffly. No hugs, no offers to help clean up. Just two people who had walked into what they thought was a family visit, and walked out with the realization that they'd been guests in a life they no longer understood. There was no yelling, just quiet, and in that quiet, they realized what they'd lost. They stood by the door, holding their coats but not quite putting them on. The envelope was still on the coffee table behind them, untouched now, like a bad smell no one wanted to acknowledge. I opened the door slowly. It was early evening. The sun had dipped just far enough to cast long shadows on the porch. The air smelled like rain was coming. Dad adjusted his sleeves. Mom wiped under her eye before the tear even had a chance to fall. And I felt something I hadn't felt around them in years. Stillness. Not tension, not awkward guilt. Just still. They stepped outside. I didn't follow. "Claire," Mom finally said, turning halfway back toward me. I raised a hand gently. "It's okay," I said. "Really. I don't know what you want us to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "I just need you to hear me now." She blinked. "I won't need anything else from you," I said, soft but clear. "Ever." Dad stood at the foot of the porch steps, shoulders slightly hunched. Not angry, just unmoored. For the first time, I realized he looked older, smaller. I waited until they got to the car. Mom opened the passenger door and slid in silently. She turned her head toward the window, eyes shining. Dad sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, but didn't start the engine right away. They just sat there, still, wordless, processing. I stayed on the porch, not watching them leave, just letting it be known that I wasn't going with them. I didn't cry, didn't collapse into a puddle once they were gone. I just closed the front door gently behind me, clicked the lock, and leaned against the wood for a moment. Not exhausted, not triumphant, just free. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't rebellion, it was release. I didn't need them to feel bad. I didn't need them to chase me. I just needed to stop carrying a relationship where I was the only one holding the weight. And in that moment, sealed by quiet, by cinnamon still lingering in the air, by the closing click of the front door, they finally felt it. The absence, the shift. The silence wasn't a pause. It was the ending. "I wish I had your spine," Madison whispered. "All I have is curated confidence." The call came the next night, just after 10 p.m. I almost didn't answer. Her name flashed across the screen. Madison. Yes, with the emojis. A remnant from the days when she was constantly promoting her moonlight coaching brand. I stared at it, let it ring twice, 3 times, and then, for reasons I still can't explain, I picked up. "Hey." Silence. Then, "Wow, you actually answered." Her tone was sharp, a little performative, the kind of voice she used in Instagram stories when calling out negative energy. "I figured you'd be too enlightened for confrontation," I replied dryly. She exhaled. "Look, I'm just gonna say it. What the hell did you do to Mom and Dad?" I didn't respond. They came back like ghosts. Mom's been crying on and off. Dad won't stop staring at the fireplace. "Did you drop some emotional nuke or something?" I told them the truth, I said calmly. Something they've been too comfortable ignoring. She scoffed. Then it got quiet. Too quiet. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted. Less edge, more weight. "They always told me you were fine," she said. "That you were strong and didn't need help. I guess I believed it because it made things easier." I didn't interrupt. But I watched Mom sob tonight like someone had died. And for once, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't fix it with a filter or a gratitude post. Her voice cracked just slightly. "They don't love me, Claire," she said, softer now. "They love the image I sell, the daughter they can show off. But half the time, I don't even recognize the person they built me into." That stopped me cold, because for all these years, I'd assumed she was complicit, thriving, coasting, basking in the spotlight while I stayed behind the curtain. But maybe the spotlight burned her too. "And you sold it well," I said, measured. "But you also sold me out to keep it." She didn't deny it, didn't fight back, didn't throw some spiritual bypassing quote at me like, "We're all just healing through our pain, sis." She just breathed, heavy and unfiltered. "I wish I had your spine," she finally whispered. "All I have is curated confidence." We sat in silence, connected only by a phone line and years of unspoken weight. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness either. But it was something. A thread, a crack, a beginning. And maybe that's all healing ever really is. Less like a reunion, more like a pause in the war. They send cards. I don't respond. They left me out of their love. Now I leave them out of my life. It's been a year. 12 months of sunrise through wide windows, of hot coffee brewed in a kitchen that smells like basil and fresh paint. Of quiet, not the aching kind, but the kind that feels earned. I've grown tomatoes in the backyard, badly at first, but I learned. Now I have more cherry tomatoes than I can eat, so I leave paper bags of them on neighbors' porches with little handwritten notes. My phone doesn't buzz with family group chats anymore. There are no invitations, no guilt-tripped brunches, just the occasional envelope in the mail, Mom's handwriting, carefully cursive, still looping her G's like it's 1987. They sent a Christmas card last December. A posed photo in matching sweaters. No Madison. No dog this time. Just two people smiling through the kind of sadness that doesn't show up until everyone else has already left the room. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. Not because I was punishing them. But because I'd spent years learning how to open doors, beg to be let in, and pretend like crumbs were enough. Now, I've learned to close doors. Gently, quietly, and not look back through the peephole. I heard through a distant cousin that some of my parents' old friends have started asking questions. Where's Claire been? Why didn't she come to Thanksgiving? Did something happen? And I imagine my mother giving polite smiles, changing the subject. My father pretending it's just logistics, because admitting the truth, that they built a hierarchy and assumed I'd always play second, is harder than pretending everything's fine. But I'm not angry. I'm content. I'm free. I'm building something slow, something real, something that doesn't need applause to be valid. I don't need to prove anything anymore. Not to them. Not to Madison. Not even to the version of myself who used to believe love was earned through performance. They said no when I needed them. So now, they get to feel what no feels like. Every holiday, every milestone, every ordinary day they expected to be included in, by default, not by effort. Some people learn through confrontation. Others, they learn through absence. And in that absence, I've grown.